Walter Grayson had always been a quiet man, content to live a simple life tending to his farm on the outskirts of Millhaven, a town as ordinary as they came. Nestled in the heart of rolling hills and endless cornfields, Millhaven was a place where everyone knew everyone and news traveled faster than the tractors plowing its fields. Walter, however, was something of an oddity. He wasn't unfriendly, just different. He kept to himself, spent hours tinkering with gadgets, and had an uncanny knack for solving problems no one else even noticed. His latest project, a state-of-the-art surveillance camera he'd installed in his barn, quickly became the talk of the town, though not in the way Walter might have hoped. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Walter was in town picking up supplies when he mentioned to old Joe at the hardware store that he'd finally installed a camera to monitor his barn. Joe, a man whose penchant for gossip was rivaled only by his love for coffee, found the idea amusing. A barn camera? Joe had chuckled. What's next, Walter? Motion sensors for your chickens? The two laughed it off, but by evening, the story had spread to every corner of Millhaven. By the end of the week, Walter was the subject of countless jokes. At the diner, teenagers mimicked him setting up imaginary cameras. At the feed store, farmers speculated on whether Walter thought aliens were stealing his hay bales. Even the pastor slipped a quip into Sunday's sermon, drawing chuckles from the congregation. To everyone in town, the idea of monitoring a barn was a testament to Walter's eccentricity, a harmless but amusing quirk of the local oddball. Walter, however, wasn't bothered by the jabs. He had his reasons. For weeks, strange things had been happening on his property, subtle at first, almost dismissible. A gate left open here, a missing tool there. But then came the footprints. They appeared one morning, leading from the edge of the woods to his barn and back again, their pattern too deliberate to belong to any animal. Walter's gut told him something was amiss, and he trusted his gut. It had kept him alive during his years in the Navy, and he wasn't about to start doubting it now. When the first night of recordings yielded nothing more than a raccoon rummaging through feed sacks, Walter almost let himself believe the town was right. But on the third night, the camera captured something he couldn't ignore, a figure, cloaked in shadows, slipping into the barn shortly after midnight. The footage was grainy, the figure's features obscured, but there was no mistaking the deliberate way they moved, as if they knew exactly what they were looking for. Walter's heart raced as he replayed the footage. He debated calling the sheriff, but something held him back. Sheriff Doyle was a good man, but he wasn't exactly the town's most proactive enforcer of the law. Besides, Walter wasn't ready to make a scene, not without more evidence. So he decided to keep the discovery to himself and upgraded the camera with night vision and motion alerts, determined to catch whoever, or whatever, was prowling his property. Over the next few nights, the camera recorded more footage, each clip more unsettling than the last. The figure returned, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, their movements growing bolder. They rifled through feed bins, examined tools, and even approached the animals, though they never caused harm. Walter began to notice patterns. They always came on moonless nights, always between midnight and 3 a.m., always careful to avoid leaving too much evidence behind. The meticulousness of their actions only deepened Walter's unease. The town, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the growing mystery. To them, Walter's barn camera was still a joke, a punchline that refused to grow old. But Walter's demeanor began to change, his usual quiet confidence giving way to something more strained. He became more reclusive, skipping his usual trips to town, speaking in clipped sentences when he did venture out. The change didn't go unnoticed. "What's eating Walter?" Joe asked one morning, his question met with shrugs and speculative theories ranging from health issues to financial troubles. It wasn't long before the ridicule reached Walter's doorstep, literally. One morning, he found a crudely drawn cartoon taped to his mailbox, a caricature of himself holding a camera, with the caption, "Smile for the barn cam." Walter crumpled the paper in his fist, his jaw tightening. It wasn't the mockery that bothered him, it was the ignorance. If only they knew what he knew, what he'd seen. The tipping point came on a stormy night in late October. The wind howled through the trees, rain pelting the roof of Walter's farmhouse in relentless sheets. He had almost convinced himself the weather would keep the intruders away, but his phone buzzed at 2:14 a.m., a motion alert from the barn camera. He opened the live feed and froze. The figure was back, but this time they weren't alone. 3 shadowy figures moved in unison, their faces obscured by hoods, their hands clutching what appeared to be tools. Walter's stomach churned as he watched them pry open a feed bin, their actions quick and deliberate. This time, Walter didn't hesitate. He grabbed his shotgun, loaded it with birdshot, and slipped into his raincoat. The rain was icy against his skin as he stepped onto his porch, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He moved cautiously, the storm masking his footsteps as he approached the barn. Inside, the figures' voices were low and urgent, their words drowned out by the storm. Walter's hands tightened around the shotgun as he stepped into the doorway. "What the hell are you doing in my barn?" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the noise. Like a gunshot. The figures froze, their heads snapping toward him. For a moment, no one moved, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, one of the intruders lunged toward Walter. Without thinking, Walter fired a warning shot into the air. The deafening blast sent the figures scrambling, their retreat frantic and disorganized. Within moments, they disappeared into the night, leaving Walter alone in the barn, his heart pounding in his chest. The next morning, Walter reviewed the footage, his hands trembling as he clicked through the clips. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The intruders had been searching for something specific, their actions too purposeful to be random vandalism. And then, in the final clip, he spotted it, a small, metallic object one of them had dropped near the barn door. Walter retrieved it later that day, holding it up to the light. It was a key, its surface engraved with a strange symbol Walter didn't recognize. Whatever was happening on his property, it was bigger than he'd realized. Walter knew he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. As he stared at the key, his resolve hardened. He wasn't just protecting his farm anymore, he was unraveling a mystery, one that would shake the entire town to its core. Walter sat at his kitchen table, the mysterious key placed carefully in the center. The morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating its strange, intricate design. He turned it over in his hands, studying every ridge and groove. The symbol etched into its surface was like nothing he'd ever seen, a series of interlocking shapes, almost geometric but not quite. It didn't match anything he'd encountered in his years of farming, his time in the Navy, or even his amateur tinkering with gadgets. Whatever this key opened, it wasn't something ordinary. The town of Millhaven, however, carried on as usual. At the diner, the regulars swapped stories, and Walter's barn camera still served as the butt of jokes. If anyone noticed his growing isolation or the tension in his voice when he spoke, they chalked it up to him being his usual eccentric self. But Walter's mind was consumed by the footage, the key, and the unsettling realization that his quiet life had been invaded by forces he didn't understand. He spent hours researching the symbol online, combing through forums, old archives, and obscure websites. The search yielded little, a few vague references to ancient societies, cryptic mentions in conspiracy theory threads, but nothing concrete. Frustrated but undeterred, Walter decided to revisit the barn, hoping to uncover more clues. He scoured every inch of the space, from the hayloft to the tool racks, but found nothing out of place, except for a faint set of scratches near the back wall, as though something heavy had been dragged across the floor. Walter dropped to his knees and ran his hands over the wooden planks. One of them felt loose. Heart pounding, he pried it up with a crowbar, revealing a shallow compartment hidden beneath the floor. Inside was a small, weathered box, its surface covered in the same strange symbols as the key. His hands shook as he inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked smoothly, and the lid creaked open to reveal its contents: a stack of yellowed documents, a photograph, and a map. The photograph was black and white, showing a group of men and women standing in front of a building that looked vaguely familiar. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their expressions somber, their eyes piercing. Walter flipped it over. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "Millhaven Historical Society, 1937. The map, meanwhile, depicted the town as it must have been decades ago, with several locations marked in red. And the documents, handwritten and densely packed with notes, were indecipherable at first glance, filled with unfamiliar symbols and cryptic phrases. Walter felt a chill creep down his spine. Whatever he'd stumbled upon wasn't just about his farm, it was connected to the town's history, to secrets buried long before he was born. He knew he needed help, someone who could make sense of the papers and the map. But who could he trust? The sheriff would dismiss him outright, and most of the townsfolk would laugh him out of the room. Then he thought of Clara. Clara Whitmore was the town librarian, a sharp-witted woman in her 60s with a penchant for solving puzzles and a reputation for knowing more about Millhaven than anyone else. If anyone could shed light on the strange items, it was her. Walter packed everything into a satchel and made his way into town, his unease growing with every step. The library was nearly empty when he arrived, the quiet only broken by the rustle of pages and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Clara looked up from her desk as he entered, her keen eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Walter Grayson," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Haven't seen you around here in a while. What brings you to my corner of the world?" "I need your help," Walter said, his voice low. "It's complicated." Clara raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to sit. He placed the satchel on the table and pulled out the photograph, map, and documents. Clara's expression shifted from curiosity to intrigue as she examined each item. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her tone serious. Walter hesitated. "They were hidden on my property," he said carefully. "I think they might be connected to something going on in the town." Clara didn't press further. Instead, she focused on the photograph, tracing the faces with her finger. "I recognize some of these people," she said. "That's Thomas Sinclair, the founder of the Millhaven Historical Society. And that's Margaret Hensley, she was a teacher here during the 1930s. But these others? I'm not sure." She moved on to the documents, her brow furrowing as she deciphered the handwriting. "This is old," she murmured. "And not just in age. The language, it's a mix of Latin, Greek, and something else I can't place. These symbols, though, they look like alchemical notations." "Alchemy?" Walter repeated, skeptical. "Not in the turning lead into gold sense," Clara clarified. "More like ancient chemistry, tied to philosophy and spiritualism. It was a way of understanding the world before modern science." "But why would something like this be hidden on your farm?" Walter shook his head. "I don't know. But it's not just the documents. People have been sneaking onto my property at night, searching for something. And this key, it was dropped by one of them." Clara leaned back, her expression grave. "This isn't just about history, Walter. Someone thinks what's in these papers is valuable enough to break into your barn. And if they're right, you could be sitting on something much bigger than you realize." As they talked, a sense of urgency began to build. Clara promised to study the documents more thoroughly, but she warned Walter to be cautious. "If you're being watched, the last thing you want is to draw more attention to yourself," she said. "Keep this quiet, at least until we know what we're dealing with." Walter agreed, but his mind was racing. That night, as he sat in his kitchen reviewing the map, he noticed something strange. One of the red marks corresponded to a stretch of forest near his property. It wasn't far from the barn, close enough that the intruders might have used it as a staging ground. Fueled by curiosity and a growing sense of dread, he decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and his shotgun, Walter ventured into the woods under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. He followed the map's markings, his steps cautious, his senses alert. After what felt like an eternity, he stumbled upon a clearing. At its center was a crumbling stone structure, overgrown with moss and ivy. It looked like an old well, though its design was unlike anything Walter had seen before. The same strange symbols from the documents were etched into its surface, their lines glowing faintly in the moonlight. Walter's stomach churned as he realized the key fit perfectly into a small, hidden lock near the base. He hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Whatever lay beneath that well wasn't just a relic of the past, it was the reason for the intrusions, the hidden documents, and the unease that had gripped him for weeks. Taking a deep breath, he turned the key. A low rumble echoed through the clearing as the stone shifted, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. Walter gripped his flashlight tighter, his pulse hammering in his ears. He took the first step, his mind racing with questions. What was hidden below? And why had it been buried for so long? As he descended, the air grew colder, the walls damp and rough against his fingertips. The staircase seemed to stretch on forever, each step taking him further from the world he knew. And yet, he couldn't turn back, not now, not with the answers so close. Whatever secrets Millhaven held, Walter was about to uncover them. Walter descended the spiraling staircase, each step taking him deeper into the cold, damp earth. The air was heavy, carrying the faint metallic tang of something ancient, as if time itself had been sealed away here. His flashlight beam flickered across the rough stone walls, revealing intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. The symbols mirrored those on the key in the documents, strange, otherworldly shapes that hinted at meanings just out of reach. The staircase finally ended in a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves carved directly into the stone. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound Walter's own ragged breathing. On the shelves lay a collection of oddities, glass vials filled with murky liquids, tarnished brass instruments that looked like they belonged in an alchemist's lab, and weathered leather-bound books stacked haphazardly. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, its surface worn smooth from age. Atop it lay a small, intricately crafted box. Walter hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just an old cellar or a forgotten storage room. It felt purposeful, like a shrine or a vault. His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be tied to the strange figures caught on his barn camera? Was this what they had been searching for? And why was it hidden here, beneath his farm? Taking a deep breath, Walter approached the pedestal. The box was unlike anything he'd ever seen, its surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl and etched with the same cryptic symbols. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside was a single object, a small, metallic disc about the size of his palm. It shimmered faintly in the flashlight's beam, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and dance as he moved it. As he examined the disc, a sudden noise made him freeze. A faint scuffling sound echoed from the staircase behind him. Walter's heart leapt into his throat. Someone, or something, was coming. Quickly, he slipped the disc into his jacket pocket and extinguished the flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness. He pressed himself against the cold stone wall, straining his ears to catch any hint of movement. The scuffling grew louder, accompanied by the faint sound of whispers. Walter's mind raced. Had the intruders discovered his presence? Were they the same figures from the barn or someone else entirely? He felt the weight of the shotgun slung over his shoulder, a small comfort in the oppressive darkness. The whispers grew clearer as the intruders entered the chamber, their voices low and urgent. Walter could make out at least 3 distinct speakers, though their words were in a language he didn't recognize. He held his breath, his pulse pounding in his ears as he tried to remain perfectly still. The intruders moved around the room, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. One of them stopped near the pedestal, their voice rising slightly as if in frustration. Walter risked a quick glance and saw a faint glow emanating from something the figure held, a device, perhaps, though its design was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The glow illuminated their features briefly, a man with sharp, angular features, his expression grim and focused. His companions were similarly intense, their movements purposeful as they searched the shelves and examined the objects within. Walter's mind raced. He needed to get out of there, but the staircase was blocked by the intruders. He glanced around the chamber, searching for another exit, but the room was a dead end. His only hope was to wait for an opportunity to slip past them. As he watched, one of the intruders picked up a vial from the shelf and held it to the glowing device. The liquid inside bubbled briefly, and the man nodded, slipping the vial into a pouch at his side. Another intruder muttered something and gestured toward the pedestal, where the box now sat empty. The group exchanged tense looks, and the angular-faced man spoke sharply, his tone laced with urgency. Walter's stomach clenched. They were looking for the disc, and they would soon realize it was gone. He had to act quickly. Clutching the shotgun, he edged along the wall, moving as silently as he could. The intruders were engrossed in their search, their focus divided among the shelves and the pedestal. Walter reached the base of the staircase and paused, waiting for the right moment. Suddenly, one of the intruders let out a sharp exclamation, holding up a scrap of paper they'd found among the clutter. The angular-faced man snatched it from them, his eyes scanning the text rapidly. He barked an order, and the group began to gather their findings, their movements hurried. Walter seized the opportunity and darted up the staircase, his footsteps muffled by the soft soles of his boots. He emerged into the forest, the cool night air a stark contrast to the stifling chamber below. He didn't stop to catch his breath, instead sprinting through the trees toward his house. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. Whoever those people were, they were X. To shift, forming a faint, glowing outline of a larger structure. Walter stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Whatever this disc was, it was far beyond anything he'd ever encountered. As they worked through the night, piecing together clues from the documents and the disc, a grim realization began to take shape. The intruders weren't just treasure hunters or curious historians, they were part of something much darker. And Walter was now caught in the middle of it. By dawn, Clara looked up from the desk, her face pale but determined. "We need to find where this leads," she said, her voice steady. "And we need to do it before they do." Walter and Clara sat in the dim glow of the library's desk lamp, their exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. The cryptic patterns on the disc still shimmered faintly, defying explanation. Clara had been poring over the ancient texts and maps she'd collected over the years, her fingers tracing lines of faded ink and weathered parchment. Walter, his nerves on edge, paced the small room, peering out of the window every so often. The memory of the intruders in the underground chamber weighed heavily on him. Clara broke the silence. "There's a connection here, Walter. This disc, it's not just a key, it's part of a larger system, something meant to be activated. But it's ancient, and its purpose is tied to the land itself." She gestured to a series of maps spread out before her. "See this? These symbols match geological formations in the area, places people have dismissed as unremarkable for generations." Walter leaned over, studying the maps. His farm, the surrounding woods, and even the old creek bed were all marked with the same intricate symbols from the disc. "Why my farm?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and frustration. "Why would they bury something like this there?" Clara looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it wasn't always your farm. Think about it, how long has your family owned the land?" Walter paused. His grandfather had purchased the property nearly a century ago, and before that, it had passed through countless hands, many of which left no documented trace. I guess I don't know. It's just always been ours. Clara nodded. Exactly. This isn't just about your family, Walter. It's about the land itself. Whoever buried that disc, and built that chamber, chose your farm because of something unique about it. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp ring of Clara's phone. She grabbed it, frowning as she saw the number. Unknown caller, she muttered. Against her better judgment, she answered. Hello? There was a pause, then a deep, distorted voice spoke. You've meddled in something you don't understand. Return what you've taken, or face the consequences. Clara's heart raced as she put the call on speaker. Walter's eyes widened as he heard the chilling tone. Who is this? Clara demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The voice ignored her question. You think you've uncovered secrets, but all you've done is paint a target on your back. The disc does not belong to you. Return it to the chamber, and we will leave you in peace. The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Walter and Clara exchanged a worried glance. They know, Walter whispered. They know we have it. Clara stood, her resolve hardening. We can't give it back, Walter. Not without understanding what it is. If we do, we'll never know what they're planning, or why they want it so badly. Walter nodded, though unease gnawed at him. Then what's our next move? We need to follow the map, Clara said firmly. Whatever this disc is meant to do, we have to figure it out before they do. And we need to stay ahead of them. With a plan in place, they packed supplies for the journey. Clara brought along her research materials, while Walter retrieved a few essentials, including his shotgun and a sturdy flashlight. They decided to start with the nearest marked location on the map, a rocky outcrop a few miles from the farm, known locally as Widow's Bluff. The name itself carried an ominous weight, tied to old legends of mysterious disappearances and strange lights. The drive to the bluff was tense, the weight of the disc and the recent threats pressing heavily on their minds. The landscape was eerily quiet as they arrived, the stillness broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. The bluff loomed before them, its jagged edges silhouetted against the pale light of dawn. Clara studied the map as they approached. The symbols indicate a point near the edge, where the rock juts out over the valley. There should be a marker or some kind of entryway. Walter scanned the ground, his sharp eyes catching a faint glimmer among the rocks. Over here, he called, crouching to examine a small metallic plate embedded in the stone. The plate bore the same swirling patterns as the disc, and a shallow indentation in its center matched the disc's size perfectly. Clara knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the disc into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the ground beneath them began to shift. A section of the bluff slid open, revealing a narrow staircase carved into the rock. Walter and Clara exchanged a glance, their determination outweighing their fear. They descended cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. The staircase opened into a cavern, its walls glittering with crystalline formations that refracted their flashlight beams into dazzling patterns. In the center of the cavern stood a stone altar, its surface engraved with the same symbols that had haunted them since the discovery of the disc. On the altar lay another object, a second disc, slightly larger than the first and etched with even more intricate designs. Clara's breath caught. It's part of a set, she murmured, carefully picking it up. This confirms it, Walter. The disc isn't just a key, it's one piece of a much larger puzzle. Their awe was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing down the staircase. Walter's blood ran cold. He turned, his flashlight beam catching the angular-faced man from the underground chamber. Behind him were two of his companions, their expressions cold and calculating. Well done, the man said, his voice smooth but menacing. You've saved us some trouble by finding the second piece. Now hand it over. Walter stepped protectively in front of Clara, his grip tightening on the shotgun. Who are you? What do you want with this? The man smirked. You wouldn't understand, farmer. But suffice it to say, the world isn't ready for what these discs can do. It's better if they remain in the hands of those who know how to use them. And what if we don't give them to you? Clara challenged, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The man's smirk faded. Then you leave us no choice. Before Walter could react, one of the intruders lunged forward. Walter fired the shotgun, the deafening blast echoing through the cavern. The man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, but the others pressed on. Walter and Clara retreated toward the staircase, the second disc clutched tightly in Clara's hands. As they reached the base of the stairs, a sudden tremor shook the cavern. The crystalline formations above them began to crack, shards raining down as the ground beneath them shifted violently. Clara shouted over the chaos, the discs. They're reacting to each other. Walter grabbed her arm, pulling her up the stairs as the cavern began to collapse. The intruders scrambled to follow, their shouts drowned out by the roaring sound of falling rock. Walter and Clara emerged onto the bluff just as the entrance sealed itself behind them, the ground closing over the staircase as if it had never been there. They stood in stunned silence, the weight of the discs pressing heavily on their minds. Clara looked at Walter, her eyes filled with determination. This isn't over, she said. There's more to this story, more pieces to find. And we can't stop now. Walter nodded, his resolve hardening. The mysteries of the discs were far from solved, and the danger was greater than ever. But they had taken the first step, and there was no turning back. The sun was setting as Walter and Clara returned to the farm, the golden light casting long shadows across the fields. Exhaustion weighed on them both, but their determination burned brighter than ever. The two discs were carefully placed on the kitchen table, their surfaces glinting faintly as if alive with some latent energy. Walter couldn't take his eyes off them, the patterns swirling hypnotically under the dim overhead light. We're in deeper than I ever imagined, Walter muttered, rubbing his temples. Clara, these things, whatever they are, they've already cost us so much. And those people, they're not going to stop. Clara sat across from him, her fingers tapping lightly against the wooden table. I know, Walter. But what's the alternative? We've come too far to back down now. These discs aren't just relics, they're connected to something much bigger. If we don't figure this out, they will, and I don't trust their intentions. As they spoke, a low hum began to emanate from the discs. Startled, they leaned closer. The symbols on the surfaces began to glow faintly, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Walter reached out cautiously, his hand hovering just above one of the discs. Careful, Clara warned, her voice tense. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a sharp jolt of energy coursed through him. He gasped, yanking his hand back, but not before a vivid image flashed in his mind, a sprawling network of glowing lines stretching across the landscape, connecting points of light that seemed to represent specific locations. It was over in an instant, leaving Walter breathless and disoriented. Walter. Are you okay? Clara rushed to his side, steadying him as he swayed. I saw something, he stammered. Like a map. The discs, they're not just keys. They're part of some kind of system, connecting different places. It's all tied together, Clara. Clara's eyes widened. A map? Did you recognize any of the locations? Walter closed his eyes, trying to recall the fleeting vision. Some of them, maybe. Landmarks near the farm. The old mill, Widow's Bluff, even the creek bed. But there were others I didn't recognize, places further out. Clara grabbed a notebook and began sketching as Walter described the vision. As the map took shape, it became clear that the points formed a precise pattern, each connected to the others by lines that radiated outward like a web. "This isn't random," Clara said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's a network. And if the disks are part of it, then there must be more of them out there." Walter nodded. "But why? What's the purpose of this network?" Before Clara could respond, a loud knock at the door shattered the moment. Both of them froze, the weight of the recent threats bearing down on them. Walter grabbed his shotgun, gesturing for Clara to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Outside stood a woman in her late 50s, her weathered face framed by silver-streaked hair. She wore a long coat and carried a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. Something about her presence radiated authority, but also an air of mystery. "Who are you?" Walter demanded through the door. The woman's gaze was steady, her voice calm. "My name is Evelyn Ward. I'm here about the discs. I mean you no harm, but we need to talk, now." Walter hesitated, glancing back at Clara, who shrugged, her curiosity piqued. Against his better judgment, he opened the door, keeping the shotgun at his side but ready. Evelyn stepped inside, her eyes immediately landing on the discs on the table. She let out a low whistle. "So it's true. You found them. Who are you?" Walter repeated, his tone sharper this time. "How do you know about the discs?" Evelyn set her satchel down and pulled out a folder filled with old photographs and documents. "I've been tracking these artifacts for decades," she explained. "They're part of an ancient system, one that predates any civilization we know of. The network you saw in your vision, it's designed to channel energy, but its purpose is still a mystery." Clara leaned forward, her skepticism evident. "And how do we know you're not working with the people who've been chasing us?" Evelyn met her gaze evenly. "Because if I were, you wouldn't still have the discs." She opened the folder, revealing a faded photograph of a similar disc being unearthed at an archaeological site. These discs have appeared throughout history, always in times of great turmoil. They've been linked to natural disasters, unexplained phenomena, even wars. Whoever controls them holds immense power. Walter frowned. "Power to do what?" "That depends on the intent of the user," Evelyn said. "The discs can amplify energy, natural, physical, even emotional. In the wrong hands, they could be catastrophic." Clara exchanged a worried glance with Walter. "And in the right hands?" Evelyn hesitated. "That's the question, isn't it? No one has ever fully unlocked their potential. But I believe the network was designed as a safeguard, something to stabilize the energy rather than exploit it. That's why it's so important to keep these out of the wrong hands." Walter gestured to the map Clara had sketched. "There are more locations, more discs. If we can find them, maybe we can figure out how to use the network." Evelyn nodded. "But you won't be the only ones looking. The group pursuing you, they call themselves the Veil. They've been hunting the discs for generations, driven by a belief that they're destined to control the network. They'll stop at nothing to get them." The gravity of her words hung heavy in the air. Walter sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "So what do we do now?" Evelyn's expression hardened. "We move quickly. We need to retrieve as many discs as we can before the Veil does. But this won't be easy. The locations are scattered, and the Veil will be watching." Clara stood, her resolve firm. "Then we don't waste any more time. Let's start with the locations we know." Over the next several hours, the trio prepared for the journey ahead. Evelyn shared what she knew about the Veil's tactics and history, while Clara and Walter packed supplies and mapped out their route. The next marked location was several miles away, deep in the forest near an abandoned mining site. As they set out under the cover of darkness, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The weight of the discs in his bag felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. But beneath his fear was a growing sense of purpose. For the first time, he felt like he was fighting for something greater than himself, something worth risking everything for. The forest was eerily silent as they approached the site, the towering trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, the remnants of old mining equipment rusting away in the underbrush. Evelyn led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. "This is it," she whispered, stopping at a moss-covered boulder marked with faint carvings. She pointed to a small, concealed hatch in the ground. "The next piece is down there." Walter and Clara exchanged a nervous glance before prying open the hatch. The narrow shaft descended into darkness, the air growing colder as they climbed down. At the bottom, they found themselves in another underground chamber, its walls adorned with glowing symbols similar to those on the discs. In the center of the room sat a pedestal, and upon it rested a third disc. As they approached, the symbols on the walls began to pulsate, their glow intensifying. Clara reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the surface of the disc. Suddenly, the chamber trembled, and the walls began to shift. Walter turned, his heart sinking as he saw a figure silhouetted in the entrance, the angular-faced man from before, flanked by two of his companions. "Well, well," the man sneered. "Looks like you've saved us the trouble again." Walter stepped in front of Clara, his shotgun raised. "You're not taking this one." The man laughed coldly. "We'll see about that." As the chamber trembled around them, the air crackling with energy, Walter realized the fight for the discs was far from over. The stakes had never been higher, and their journey was only just beginning. The chamber's walls shuddered violently, the glowing symbols casting flickering shadows across the room. Walter tightened his grip on the shotgun, standing between Clara and the angular-faced man who loomed at the entrance. The man's sneer was replaced with a cold intensity as he stepped forward, flanked by two figures clad in dark, tactical gear. Their movements were precise, predatory, and it was clear they were prepared for any resistance. "Hand over the disc," the man demanded, his voice cutting through the rumble of the shifting chamber. "You don't know what you're dealing with, and you're outmatched." Walter glanced back at Clara, who clutched the disc tightly against her chest, its faint glow illuminating her determined expression. Evelyn stood beside her, scanning the room for any potential escape. Walter knew they were cornered, but he also knew surrendering wasn't an option. "Over my dead body," Walter shot back, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The man's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "That can be arranged." Without warning, one of the figures flanking him lunged forward, a baton crackling with electricity in their hand. Walter fired a warning shot into the air, the deafening sound echoing through the chamber. The attacker froze, momentarily startled, but the other figure quickly raised what appeared to be a tranquilizer gun, aiming it at Clara. "Down!" Walter shouted, shoving Clara to the floor just as a dart whizzed past her, embedding itself into the wall. The glowing symbols reacted instantly, their pulsating light intensifying as if feeding off the sudden surge of tension. Evelyn seized the moment, pulling a small device from her satchel and pressing a button. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the attackers staggered, clutching their ears. "It's an ultrasonic disruptor," Evelyn yelled over the noise. "It won't last long, move." Walter grabbed Clara's hand, hauling her to her feet, and the three of them bolted toward the far side of the chamber. The angular-faced man shouted orders to his team, but their disorientation gave Walter's group a precious head start. As they reached a narrow passageway, Evelyn pointed to a series of carved symbols on the wall. "The exit should be through there," she said, panting. "But it's likely booby-trapped." Clara hesitated, still clutching the disc. "What about them?" "They'll follow us." Walter glanced back, seeing the angular-faced man and his team recovering, their movements sharper now as they regrouped. "Then we make it harder for them," he said, gripping his shotgun tightly. He scanned the chamber, his eyes landing on an unstable section of the ceiling. "Clara, Evelyn, go," he barked. "I'll hold them off." "No." Clara protested, but Evelyn grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the passage. "Walter, don't do anything stupid," Clara shouted over her shoulder, her voice breaking. Walter ignored her, taking aim at the ceiling. He fired twice, the blast reverberating through the room. The weakened structure groaned before collapsing, a cascade of rocks and debris falling between him and the attackers. It wouldn't stop them for long, but it bought precious time. He sprinted after Clara and Evelyn, the passage narrowing as the rumbling intensified. The glowing symbols along the walls seemed to guide them, their pulsations growing faster as if urging them forward. The air grew colder, and the hum of energy became almost deafening. Finally, they emerged into another chamber, this one smaller but more intricately designed. In the center stood a raised platform, surrounded by stone pillars etched with glowing patterns. Atop the platform rested a large, circular device, its design eerily similar to the discs but on a much grander scale. "This must be the hub," Evelyn murmured, awe in her voice. "The central piece of the network." Clara stepped forward, the disc in her hands glowing brighter as she approached the platform. "Do we place it here?" she asked, looking to Evelyn for guidance. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, but we need to activate it carefully. If we rush, we could overload the system, or worse." Walter joined them, his chest heaving. "They're not far behind," he warned. "Whatever we're doing, it has to be fast." Evelyn examined the platform, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. "The disc needs to be aligned with the others," she said. "Walter, look around. There should be slots for the other pieces." Walter and Clara spread out, scanning the room. Sure enough, they found 2 additional slots carved into the stone pillars, each perfectly sized to hold a disc. Clara placed the one she carried into the slot nearest the platform, and Walter inserted the second disc they had retrieved earlier. The moment the discs clicked into place, the room erupted with light, the symbols along the walls and pillars glowing in unison. A low vibration coursed through the floor, growing stronger with each passing second. The circular device at the center of the platform began to rotate, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. Evelyn stepped back, her eyes wide with both fear and fascination. "This is it," she said. "The network is coming online." Before anyone could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the chamber, and a cloud of dust and debris filled the air. The angular-faced man and his team burst through the rubble, their weapons drawn. "Step away from the platform," the man barked, his voice dripping with menace. "You have no idea what you're unleashing." Walter raised his shotgun, but the man shook his head. "Don't be foolish. You fire that thing, and we all go down." Clara stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Why do you want this? What are you really after?" The man's eyes gleamed. "Power. Control. This network has the potential to reshape the world, and it's wasted on people like you." Evelyn hesitated before nodding. "For now. But the network has been activated. Its energy is spreading across the grid. We've set something in motion, and I don't know if we can stop it." Walter placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." As they stood in the radiant glow of the network's core, the room began to shift, the symbols along the walls rearranging themselves into new patterns. It was clear that their journey wasn't over, in fact, it was just beginning. The discs were only the first step in uncovering the network's true purpose, and the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, Walter felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something bigger, something that could change the world. And as they stepped back into the night, the faint glow of the discs lighting their path, He knew they were ready for whatever came next.